So we are continuing with our 5-part sermon series, Putting into Practice, as we look at the New Testament book, the book of James. And we said the purpose behind this series is to encourage all believers, those who are in the faith community, to put into practice the teachings of God. And we said that this Greek word, praktikos, is actually used quite often in this book. We're actually having an encounter with it again today. But it means to do or to act, meaning there are things that we who are called into the community of faith are encouraged to put into our lives. And we looked at that first week, putting into or practice into the trials of life. And we said the takeaway from that was, practicing our faith, even in the suffering or trials of this life, in which many of us are going through, it does produce a perseverance that leads to spiritual maturity as well as completeness in our lives. And then the second part of this, we look about practicing in works, and we said that takeaway is practicing on works or deeds shows a faith that is truly alive. And any of these messages you can go back and watch on our social media if you missed any of these weeks. And then we also looked at last week, practicing in taming the tongue, where James pours into that in James chapter 3. And we said the takeaway with that is that you can tame your tongue, right, with the perfect one's help, meaning Jesus. And it can change the core of who you are, of what you speak, and how you live your lives. And today, we're looking at practicing in community as we take a look at the fourth of the 5 chapters, so chapter 4 in James. But before we do that, let's just back up one verse. Because we didn't look at this last week, but James chapter 3, verse 18, because you have to understand that when these letters were written, it's not like they numbered everything and broke it down by chapters and verses. So for us, going back one verse, it's not like we're just picking up something. It may have been a thought that James was leading into when he was writing this. But I want to cover this one verse to kind of give us some foundation as we look at this chapter 4 and practicing in community. When he says this verse, peacemakers who sow in peace. Would you not agree we need peacemakers in this day and age? As so much war making that seems to be going on. We need peacemakers who sow in peace, and look at this, reap a harvest of righteousness. And this is important to think about, this word righteous or righteousness that James is being used here at this verse, because it seems to piggyback on what we see in chapter 4. And we're going to look at the lexical range. That's a big fancy term, like meaning a certain word has like a bigger range of meaning. And if you've ever taken like a Bible study with me, often I'll go back and look at word studies. And I'll say, you have to understand when you look at the letters in the Old Testament and books in the Old Testament written in Hebrew and then the New Testament written in Greek, there's a lot of translation that has to be done, and some of the words have deeper meaning. And I always say, if you don't believe how hard or challenging this is, consider a 3-letter word, the word run. Okay? And you think about the lexical range of that word run. Oh, I'm going to run to the giant and pick up a few items. Now, how many people, when they say they're going to run to giant, literally run to giant? Or do they get in a car and drive to giant? Isn't that interesting? Or how about that same word, ooh, I have a runner in my stockings. What in the world does that have to do with running the giant? And what is the runner in my stockings? Or the Phillies scored 2 runs in the bottom of the 8th. What does that have to do with running the giant? Having a runner in your stocking? Or this, who are these Phillies? What's the bottom of the 8th? You see how this starts to get a little bit more confusing when you look at that one simple little word used in different contexts in a meeting. Or here's another good one with that one. Oh man, what I ate last night, it gave me the runs. Well, now what in the world does that have to do with going to giant, getting a runner in your stocking? I mean, you get the concept. It's difficult. There's range to words that we use. So just that 3-letter English word that run, you can use it in so many different contexts, right? So understand that this word righteous or righteousness is kind of used, and we're going to look at what James seems to be speaking to in this. And one of the meanings is to live justly. We might understand that one, or to be put right. But also when James is looking at this, as we're about to see as we go into this next chapter, a greater sense what he's talking about, meaning to live right before God, and then also right before others, community. Well, that kind of sounds familiar. Do you remember when they came up and they asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? How should we live? What's the greatest thing? And Jesus says these words in Matthew's Gospel, the 22nd chapter. Jesus says, look, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, meaning the righteous before God, one. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. All the Old Testament stuff. You have Jesus saying it. Now we're about to see James saying the same thing. So many people seem to say, oh, there's this great disconnection between. No, I see nothing but steps and connections all the way through scriptures. And this happens to be one of them. To be righteous, to be a true peacemaker, is to live right before God, but also right before others as well, or in your community. Consider this. Even as one of the most individualistic societies, talking to us in the world, don't we love self? Got to take care of me. I need my time. Back off. I need myself. I need to enrich myself, do things for myself. Yet, every one of us is still a product of a family or a community. So even though we try to be individualistic as possible, every one of us is part of a family or a community, not necessarily a good family. How many, if you don't believe me, how many people have said this? Boy, when I grow up, I don't want to be anything like my old man. Or I don't want to be anything like my mother. And then you go ahead and you do something, what? Just like them, right? And we end up doing those things that, whether we try to or like to or not, end up being like and influenced by the family that we're part of. So even though we may try to be as individualistic as possible as a society, I don't think this is right, and yet we see it here that we're influenced by our family and even community as well. You part of any organization, any type of thing that you belong to. I know, Mikey, you were just at the races, right? There's a whole community of people who like to go to races, and they know what you're supposed to do, wear certain ear protections and do different things. They know all about that community. If you're part of a karate community or something, you know what you have to do to be part of that community. If you're part of the band or football team, you know what it's like to be part of that community. You wear a certain outfit. You wearing a football uniform is different than wearing a band uniform, and that same field, there's a whole different community or relationship, and you act and you live that way. In other words, as individualistic as you may think you are part of a family or a community. Now, this is what James is getting at here when he talks about life within the church community or family. How do we develop, how do we live right with this? Especially with the message of society is all about self. Because the message here is about being righteous before God and others. To learn to practice in faith is what we're talking about today in the community that one submits to God, and serves others. This is what James is getting at. Now here's our first warning. You want to hear it? Nothing destroys a faith community or church quite like non-participation. Meaning if you're part of this family and you don't do anything, it will destroy that family. I use this example in the first service. Suppose you live in a large family, and everyone in the family uses dishes. They drink from cups, they eat from plates, and all they do is throw it in the sink. And then one person in that entirety of the large family is responsible for doing all the dishes. Can we look at that example and you would say, well, that's not fair, is it? The same thing in the community or life of the church. There's so much to be done and God calls us to, but what good is it if only a few people participate? One wears out the people doing the work, and the other is to say, well, I'm worried about working on myself. I need to back away from serving for myself. Or here's the other one that we get into as we look at James chapter 4, fighting within it. You want to destroy a community, fighting that goes within it. Look at our country. Would you say that we're getting along well? And if people say that how much we're fighting between just two political parties, it's destroying our country. Same thing applies even within a faith community as they're fighting among us. So let's take a look at James chapter 4. We're looking at verses 1 to 17 today. That's the entirety of the chapter. If you'd like to follow along on your pew Bibles right in front of you, if you open the page to 1198, you can follow along. Now, we said already two things. We're talking about righteousness, submission to God and also to community. Look at the very beginning in the NIV, titles this section, Submit Yourselves to God. All right. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Now look at this. Don't they come from your desire that battle within you? You desire, but do not have. Look at this. So you kill. It's that serious. So you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want. So you quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. Look at this, that you may spend what you get on what? Your pleasures. You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? It means we enemies, or drastic enemies against God. Therefore, anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you think Scripture says without reason that he jealously longs for the Spirit he has called to dwell in us, but he gives us more grace? That is why Scripture says God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Then verse 7, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Brothers and sisters, do not, and here we go against others now. We talked about submitting to God. Now look at 11. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Let's just pause right there. Let's talk about this problem of self. Anyone notice that this selfish desire that James seems to be hinting at? It's the one that causes fights and quarrels within any community, not just the faith community as well. Isn't that fascinating? Our own selfish desires gets to the heart. I mean, we want it our way. But yet, James is saying righteous behavior and peacemaking comes to those who submit to God and submit themselves to others. Now, consider this. Do young children need to be taught to share? Yeah. What's the one word that many kids will say when they have something when they're little? Mine! Mine! And you try and take it from a child. What do they say? Mine! Let me say this very graciously. Many of us pretend like we have this figured out. But how many of us scream that same word in our souls? You know, we're good. We can cover it up. Mine! Hey, we like for you to do, no, mine, my time. No. I don't like to share my time. It's about me. Consider yourselves maybe not as mature as we like to think of ourselves, because the focus is on others. Because the sin of self even can lead to killings and coveting. It's happening in our community. It's happening in our nation. It happens all around the world. But James is getting at the problem is that we're too often focused on self. It's our self that leads to these violent behaviors. It's our own desires that seem to mask what God and what James is saying in this New Testament letter, saying, look, it's more about submitting ourselves to God and to others. And this problem of self, too, it's difficult. Because I want you to ask this question. How do you react when you don't get what you want? Boy, the room got quiet there on that one. Yeah, preach it. Oh, wait a minute. No, not preach it. How do we react when we don't get what we want? We don't like it. We don't like when we are asked to step aside. Or, here's another question. Are our motives pure when we ask something from God? Or is it for self? Lord, if you just let me win that $1 billion Powerball, I'll give all that, well, at least 10% of it to you. I'll take the other 90%. Because it's hard to live off $1 billion. Isn't it fascinating how we will sometimes ask things for ourselves, even from the Lord, take me away from this problem, get me out of this issue, don't let me suffer. Lord, help me, help me, help me, help me. Not that it's wrong for crying out for help from the Lord, but we have to be careful where our hearts are, that our only focus isn't just on ourselves. Consider this. We need to love others like we know for self. Anyone pick up on the fact when Jesus says these two greatest commandments about loving God and then loving others? He literally says, like you love yourself. We don't have a problem with that, do we? Oh, because as soon as you heard that, yeah, I get it. I know how to love myself. But Jesus says, well, love others like you love yourself. And this is where this call where James is getting at, which leads us to a second warning, even there in James 4:4, where he says, when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives. That's challenging, right? That you may spend which you get, look at this, on your own pleasures. That's a challenge. All right. Anyone know this guy up there, George MacDonald? Well, no one remembers him, right? 1905 is when this sermon was preached. It's from an unspoken sermon series that he did called it. It was republished in September 2007. It was originally preached on January 1st, 1905, quite a long time ago. But yet, nothing's changed about it. Because he brings up this one principle of hell. And he spends his sermon, I'm going to read some of the sermon for you. He says, for the one principle of hell is, I am my own. I am my own king and my own subject. I am the center from which go out my thoughts. I am the object and end of my thoughts. Back upon me is the Alpha and Omega of life. My thoughts return. My own glory is and ought to be my chief care. My ambition to gather regards of men to the one center, myself. My pleasure is my pleasure. My kingdom is as many as I can bring to acknowledge my greatness over them. My judgment is the faultless rule of things. My right is what I desire. The more I am all in all to myself, the greater I am. The less I acknowledge debt or obligation to another, the more I close my eyes to the fact that I did not make myself, the more self-sufficing I feel or imagine myself, the greater I am. Whew. I am my own. And that would be a cry, I think, of many people's hearts if we're not careful. And James is encouraging every believer that if you put this into practice into your life, our focus should not be on self. As the whole Old Testament and the prophets summed it up, as Jesus put it, we're to be what? Submit to God, be righteous to Him, and to love ourselves? No, to love others. Now, from a much newer book by Tom Howard, he says there are two ways to live. My life for yours, or my life for me. Now, that's what we just talked about in that previous sermon there. My life for yours, or my life for me. Howard wrote a book called Splendor in the Ordinary. With that quote, here's the basis. Tom Howard said, there are basically two ways to live. You can live on the basis of a my life for yours, or you can live on the basis of I am my own, my life for me. Every day, you have hundreds of opportunities to operate on the basis of one of those two principles. Think about that for a moment. Every opportunity you have to do things, it can be my life for yours or my life for me. Howard continued by stating, for example, no child has ever received life except through the laying down of the mother's life for months in bearing and nourishing him. And somebody has to lay down his or her life for the child year after year after year in caring for and training for and providing for him. Those of us who are parents know this because we give up much of our lives for our kids, our time, convenience, and certainly, it said, our money. And it made me think of a time, I know when Rhonda and I were both sick, pretty laid out. We both had like bronchitis. We had pink eye. It was like throughout our whole family. And we have our 3 kids, right? And guess what? We still had to get up and make them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Help them get ready, all those type of things. You know what I'm talking about. If you are a parent, you understand about what? Living for somebody else. And that's just one example. But he goes on to say that laying down of life always entails a death. It is death in effect to my time when I give it over to help you get something done. It is death to my privilege if I let someone else in need cut in line at the front of me at store. Think about that for a moment. Hundreds of choices every day, right? To choose self or to choose somebody else or the other. Fascinating, isn't it? It's a micro level of the macro where Jesus himself laid down his life for his friends. He gave of himself at that macro level, and then we get the opportunity hundreds of times in our ordinary days to live out that very thing, to sacrifice ourselves for someone else. Now, Timothy Keller takes this thing from Howard. I was listening to a message by him this week. Tim has passed away, so I shouldn't say it was him speaking, but a recording of his message. So Tim Keller speaks of this and explains it this way. He says, the My Life for Yours principle is the only one in which any true life is possible. To embrace it is to live. To refuse it or to live my life for me is to die spiritually. There it is, Tim said. I like the way he said this. Heaven or hell lurking in your living room. And just the way he said that, meaning there's all these opportunities that you have. When you forgive, volunteer your precious time, belong to a team, don't insist on your way, these are little deaths. And yet they are deaths that lead to life. That macro vision that God had, his son died to give us life. We too will lay down our lives at time at the micro level hundreds of times each day to give ourselves life. Howard points out when someone dies to their time or privilege to do something for you and you say thank you, community is created. Why, Howard says? Thank you means I owe you and I acknowledge it gratefully. In heaven, such acknowledgments are forms of joy. In hell, no indebtedness acknowledged at all. When you say thank you, there is a bond, and you have just lost some of your independence. You owe another person to some degree, and there are obligations of community now. If every day in little ways you put someone else's needs above yours and they say thank you, you are slowly but surely becoming a community, even with that person. And he goes on and closes by saying, my prayer is that each of us every day strives to live by the principle, my life for yours. Look for opportunities to give up your time, your resources, your money to help someone else. Build community with others by giving your life for theirs and reap the enormous blessing of life in the Spirit and in that community. 2 ways to live. Your choice. My life for yours or my life for me. Isn't it interesting? And God will judge us on all of those opportunities. You think this is just one little decision? Look at that. He says the one who's right to judge will be the one to look at all of the opportunities, and he'll look at your life and say, wow, Mark, just today I gave you 100 opportunities, and 99 times you chose yourself over others. How are you scoring out in that today? It's a challenge. And that's the thing about James putting this into practice in the Christian life. Third warning, be sure you're building community and not simply part of the aggregation or cluster of people. That's a great warning about people when it comes to church. Coming in and sitting in a pew doesn't count for creating community. You're just part of the aggregation, like a cluster of people, and you can easily slip in and slip out. Those who are truly connected to the community grow and mature in their faith. Those who are out and just come as part of the aggregation are so easy to fall away. I have witnessed in my years, I haven't even been doing this all that long, going on my 8th year, and I have witnessed so many people, if they only hang out in the aggregation, something goes wrong, and it's all about themselves, and they disappear. And they leave so quickly. Don't do that to yourselves. James is saying, get connected into this community. Now, let's finish up this chapter. Boasting about tomorrow. Now listen. You who say, today or tomorrow we will go this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and do this. There's that word, do, the practice. Do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. And then he concludes this chapter by saying, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do or put into practice and doesn't put it into practice, it is a sin for them. Oh, now you all know. You are without excuse. You get to know, you have to, you should. If you know the good that you've been called to do and you aren't putting it into practice, ruh-roh, I would be a little concerned. So stop wasting time and start practicing the good you have been called to do. Let's close this out today then, shall we? Let's talk a good pirate story. Arr! Here's a pirate story about returning from home from a long journey away. And there was this pirate. He spent many years lying and stealing and cheating in a faraway land, storing up a great chest of treasure for himself. The pirate held on tightly to that chest because he saw in it something of much more value than just jewels and gold. Rather, he saw in that chest the fulfillment of all of his dreams, his hopes, and aspirations. He knew that treasure was his key to the good life. The pirate, having made his fortune, decided it was time to return home. And after boarding the ship and having traveled a great distance from the shore, a storm arose. It did not take long for the storm to overtake the ship, and soon the ship began to break into pieces. Eventually, the pirate and his treasure plunged into the cold sea. He began to sink, holding on desperately to that chest. As the pirate was sinking, all that raced through his mind was, how can I get my treasure to the surface? But slowly the pirate began to realize that life was not in the chest, but on the surface, and that holding onto the chest would cause him to die. Reluctantly, the pirate let go of that chest and began to swim upwards towards the surface. And it concludes with saying, we are like that pirate, holding onto our agendas, our egos, our fleshly desires, our selfish interests, thinking all the while that that will bring us life. But in reality, they are pulling us down towards death. Seek life for others. Start practicing real community. Your choice is what? It's for me, or is your life for others? Choose the others. Choose others in your life. Don't sink to death. Go with what James is encouraging each believer. Submit your lives to God and submit it to others and serve them as well. Would you pray with me, please? Father, we thank you for your holy word and the challenge that it brings. How many of us today may be thinking, man, I didn't want to hear that. I know the good I'm supposed to do. It's time for someone in this place to have that broken down, the brokenness of self, to be torn out of their lives, and that they be willing today to submit their lives to you, O God, but also be willing to serve others by building community, by creating it, whether it be in their jobs today, in their workplaces, where they go to school, or wherever they find themselves. Let them be a people willing to submit their lives to you and the things you've called them to, but also in serving others. Let them grow this community, O Lord, and their willing submission to you. And we ask all this in the precious name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.